Saluto intanto Franco e
Salve.
Villafranca, grazie di essere con noi.
Piacere mio.
Piacere vederti.
Okay. Good. I think that it is 6 o'clock and it's time to start our international conference on the political and economic scenario of our world in 2021. I'm Stefano Pilotto, Head of International Relations of MIB School of Management of Trieste, and we are here with our two guest speakers, Professor Franco Bruni and Professor Antonio Villafranca. They are both from ISPI. ISPI is the Istituto di Studi per la Politica Internazionale, and we have organized this conference together with ISPI. Before starting the conference, I would like to leave the floor to Professor Vladimir Nanut, who is the Dean of MIB Trieste School of Management. I think he wants to say a warm welcome to all the participants. Professor Nanut, please have the floor.
Thank you, Stefano. Just a few words. First of all, for welcome all the participants of this webinar. I am confident that will be an occasion to learn about the political economic scenario in the world. And second, I would like to thank really very much Professor Franco Bruni and Professor Antonio Villafranca for accepting our invitation and to lead this webinar. Really, with Professor Bruno, we have really a long story of cooperation since many years. With Antonio is the first time, but I hope that will be not the only one. In the future we will have other occasion to really share his, in this case, his knowledge and his experience about the political scenario around the world. Okay, this is all, and really good webinar to everybody, and I leave again the floor to Stefano for the leading this webinar.
Thank you very much, Professor Nanut, for your welcome message. Ladies and gentlemen, today is Tuesday, the 23rd of February, 2021. We have in front of us a complicated world. We have a complicated world, and we would like to know more about that, and we would like to think together about this complicated world. We would like to try to analyze which could be the possible evolution in the next months and years. We have approximately 200 countries that are interacting in this world, competing. And that is why MIB Trieste School of Management, together with ISPI Milan, decided to offer to the audience this conference on the international environment. MIB Trieste School of Management is one of the most prominent business schools in Italy that, of course, takes care about the business education of the participants, but business education which is also sensitive to the main elements that are intervening in the global environment. ISPI is Istituto di Studi per la Politica Internazionale of Milan, is the most important think tank that we have in Italy and one of the best of Europe and in the world. It is an institution which is a daily offering analysis and reports on the international political aspect. And it is also an old institution in Italy. It is located in Milan also because Milan, since many years, being at the center of the Italian economic activity, is extremely sensitive to what is going on in the international. Today we will have two very important speakers. One is Professor Franco Bruni, who is Professor Emeritus of Bocconi University of Monetarian Economy, and he's also Vice President of ISPI, and he's also the delegate of ISPI who will participate to the prestigious and important T20, which is the Think 20, which is associated to the G20, of course, activity of this year. And Professor Antonio Villafranca, who is also professor of international relations. He is also the head of the studies in ISPI, in Istituto di Studi per la Politica Internazionale, and he is an expert on the European affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, if we have a look on this map, we try to understand how complicated is today this world. 2021 has in front of all the priorities the issue connected with the pandemic. A few hours ago, the new president of the United States of America, Joe Biden, took the floor in the White House and he had to announce the very sad figures. More than 500,000 citizens in the United States died because of the pandemic, and he mentioned we had more death in the United States because of COVID-19 than of 3 different wars: the First World War, the Second World War, and the Vietnam War. So this is a huge problem. But all the other countries are affected. China was the first country to be affected. Then we had European countries, and Italy, exactly 1 year ago, was the country in Europe that started to be hit by the pandemic with the first case. And then, unfortunately, the pandemic spread all over Europe, in North America, in South America, in Africa, in Asia, in Russia, in many other countries. And as a matter of fact, all those countries are now trying to cooperate. So if we have a look on the main aspect that we have in front of our eyes, of course, we would say we have an issue concerning the world COVID-19 pandemic. How to face this incredible challenge? What are the possible reactions that we may adopt, that we may, of course, undertake in order to destroy this threat? And we are always looking for a successful and reliable world governance. We need a world governance, a balanced world governance. But of course, as we know, we have also several political problems among the different powers, and this is compromising the world governance and the functioning of the world governance. We are looking for an economic recovery. All the countries in 2020, almost all the countries except perhaps China, they had a negative growth. And that is why all the countries are looking for a successful economic recovery. How to undertake this economic recovery? Moreover, since some years, we are highly undertaking a new policy in order to take care of our environment. We need a sustainable development that would respect the world environment, the natural environment of the world. We are in front of an incredible climate change, and we have to react to this climate change and to correct the dangerous orientation of that. Moreover, we are going towards a more developed technological level of the society. We need to adopt a digital maybe revolution. We have to share all the tools that we have at our disposal to offer to all the citizens of the world the access to knowledge, the access to information, the access to the tools in order to implement the economic and the trade development. As in the end, we need, of course, security, we need peace, we need prosperity, we need ethics, because we are also looking forward a common approach to ethics, what is good and what is not good. This is another big issue. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, we have enough subject to stay hours to discuss together, but we do not have any limited time, unfortunately. So our program is to have a conference. This conference, of course, will also help us to present the important ISPI annual report. ISPI prepares every year an annual report, which is an analysis of the world. So this document will help to better understand today's world. And this report is today available on the internet site of ISPI in Italian language, but in approximately 10 days, there will also be an English version of it. So everybody can have access to the analysis of this report, which is free of charge, is available on the internet site of ISPI. Ladies and gentlemen, I was talking about pandemic first and global governance, world governance. I will start to ask the first question to our speakers, and our plan is to have a conference for approximately 50 minutes, and after the 50 minutes we would like to give the floor to the audience in order to allow the participants to ask questions to the speakers, and that will be, of course, extremely interesting, because the speakers will try to satisfy the need of knowledge and the questions of the participants. So, Professor Bruni, you have a very important task within the framework of the T20. T20 is a group, you will explain what is the T20, which is highly connected to the G20. This year, Italy will chair the G20, and Italy has a very important responsibility. We do not have only G20. Only a few days ago, the United Kingdom and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom chaired the meeting of the G7. We also have G7. But now in the last years, the G20 has acquired more and more importance, because we have a larger group of countries that may lead the world governance and offer to the world a good direction in order to approach the development. So my first question to you, Professor Bruni, is how, in your opinion, this G20 works, this G20 activity will intervene in the world development, and what are the opportunities that the G20 will offer, not only to the 20 countries, but to the rest of the world? Italy will chair it. Please, I will also show your slide, and please try to answer to this first question on the importance of the G20 and the opportunities that the G20 will offer to the world governance.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us with you, and also on behalf of ISPI in general. Can you put my first slide on the past G20? I would like to start with a very short story of the G20, just to place this year in a historical perspective. Can you put share the first slide?
Yes, I will share the screen, and I will immediately show your slide. Can you see your slide?
Well, the second, go ahead.
Yes,
the other one.
I will.
Okay, so just a very quick story of the G20. G20 started in 1999 in the middle of the Asian financial crisis, which is a very serious crisis that inspired the idea of involving the 20 major countries of the world in managing this crisis. But at that time, the G20 was composed only by finance ministers and central bankers, because the problems were mainly financial. And they went on meeting for years until 2009, when things changed because of the great financial crisis of 2007 and 8, the famous subprime crisis that hit the world in a very serious way. And at that point, the G20 was changed in the sense that it became the major group of coordinating economic policies in the world. But chiefs of state and government stepped in, so that the finance ministers and central bankers were only among the ministers making up the G20, but the G20 was chaired basically by the prime ministers, the chiefs of state and government. And moreover, the themes of the G20 were widened, not only financial issues, but more general issues of coordination at the global level. In fact, the G20 in 2009 was extremely effective. It took very important decisions, and it also took care of implementing them via various international organizations, including the IMF, etc. It was instrumental in managing the crisis and in getting us outside the crisis in a way. The problem was that as soon as the situation improved, especially in the United States, so let's say from 2010 on, the commitment of the international community to this organization decreased again. And in a way, G20 started to be much less impactful. Moreover, with the passage of years, the faith in multilateralism started to decline, as we know. There was growing nationalism and populism, and this clearly was not in accord with the spirit of the G20. It was increasingly difficult to reach consensus on G20 conclusions. If you look at the conclusions of the G20 that are available for everybody on the website, in the last 6 years or so, 7 years, you will find that they are very general, very, in a way, soft. And the conclusions were very, very light. Well, there are studies that try to check how much of the conclusions of the G20 have been translated into policy measures. And sometimes these studies are optimistic in the sense that they try to prove that the G20 has been very useful, but I'm afraid that they are cheating a little bit. I mean, the G20 is a nice diplomatic meeting, but up to now, it hasn't been very effective. And we would like to go back to the effectiveness of 2009. So if you go to the next slide, we come to the G20 of this year, where Italy has an opportunity to revitalize G20, its role, its authority, its concreteness in providing solutions. And this is, in fact, possible for at least 3 reasons. First of all, we are again dealing with an enormous shock, like the one that hit the world in 2007 and 8. It's a completely different shock. At that time, it had a financial origin. In this case, it's just the virus going around. But also for its economic consequences, it's a tremendous shock. And everybody realizes that something has to be done in order to relaunch international cooperation to cope with the disaster that we're going through. Second, there are other evidences of major problem of the world that can only be tackled with global policies. Climate and environment, for instance, are on the agenda of many countries, and international organizations have been there for many years now, and now they are clearly imposing their importance to everybody. So there's an emergency for the climate, for instance. Moreover, there are digital and technological revolutions that are clearly impressing everybody, and we have to do something to regulate and manage these revolutions. Migrations are an increasing problem, and there is an enormous increase in private and public debts around the world. Debts have been accumulating for years before the COVID crisis, but then during last year, in order to finance the needs of countries to cope with the COVID crisis, debts were increased even more, so that now it's really a problem. There's really a problem of solvency. There's really a problem of sustainability of these debts, especially for poor countries. So something has to be done, and everybody realizes that. So this is another reason why there are possibilities this year for the G20 to be really effective and taking some important decisions. There is also a renewed consciousness that protectionist and nationalistic policies are dangerous, and that multilateralism can be revitalized. Obviously, the fact that Biden is coming after Trump is encouraging in this sense. So the Italian presidency has an opportunity, and the agenda of Italy has been organized under the 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. The idea is to discuss about measures that can address the needs of people in terms of health, income distribution, education, etc. The planet in terms of environment, sustainability of the environment, and prosperity, growth, how to grow in a sustainable way. The way the G20 is organized is, well, there are the summits of the chiefs of state and government. There's a major summit at the end. It will take place sometime in October, probably. The date is still to be decided, but it's probably going to be at the end of October, something like this. But there are then a lot of ministerial meetings taking place among the ministers of different sectors. So there are the ministers for, say, health, the ministers of education, the ministers of justice, that they meet. Some of these groups will meet several times, try to discuss common problems, and convey their suggestions to the chiefs of state and government for the final decisions. Among these groups, the group that takes care of finance is the most important one, is the one that has the longest tradition. As I was telling you, the G20 started as a finance affair. So the so-called finance track has its own organization, and finance ministers will meet more frequently and take probably more urgent decisions. There are also several engagement groups. Among them, we have the T20. The T20 is the group of the think tanks of international relations of all the 20 countries that make up the G20, plus some of the think tanks of other countries that are in any way invited to contribute to the G20. What the T20 does is to mainly to write policy briefs, to conduct research, data-based, serious, empirically based research, to suggest policy measures in the different fields. There are groups that work on different subjects, and conclusions are then brought to the G20. W20 is the group of so-called Women 20 that takes care of gender issues. Business 20, it's the group of where managers and entrepreneurs get together to convey their messages to the chiefs of state and government, and so on. ISPI is the coordinator of this year's Italy's T20. And you can go for the next slide if we have time. I can tell you something about the finance track, which is the original core of the G20, and that in 2021 is probably going to take important decisions. The main task of the finance track of the G20 is to deal with the enormous debt problem of the poorest countries. Take the, say, 50 poorest countries in the world, most of them are in Africa. They are extremely in debt, and their debt are often bilateral. So they are not towards, say, international organizations, but say Angola is in heavy debt with China. And China is the major, by the way, creditor in this business. This enormous amount of debt is unsustainable. And especially during last year with the COVID shock, these countries were unable to pay interest and to service the debt. So there was already a decision at the G20 of last year to suspend the debt service of these countries. But now this decision is expiring, so we have to take new decisions. We can probably prolong the suspension, but we also have to think to something else, like restructuring these debts, cancel them. In certain cases, the idea is really to forget about these debts completely, to transform part of them, especially from bilateral to multilateral, that say the World Bank can step in, reimburse China so that Angola is going to be a debtor to the World Bank instead of being a debtor to China, which is better for global governance. We can also try to cover this debt with new instruments, new financial instruments that are more friendly to the growth of this country. There are a lot of technical proposals in preparation. By the way, the Task Force 9 of this year's G20, I am the lead, the co-chair of this task force, is working hard to produce proposals also. There are diplomatic problems probably with China for the reasons that I was telling you, that China is the major lender there. Well, there are several other aspects where the finance track will be important. Central banks will probably reinforce the network of so-called swap arrangements with which they provide short-term liquidity to major global currencies to the countries that need them for emergency. There is a lot of work on infrastructure financing, especially international global infrastructures. There is an infrastructure working group, which is part of the finance track. There's a lot of work on climate-friendly finance. So how to finance investments that are more climate-friendly. There is a lot of work on digital technology and finance, say what to do with Bitcoins, what central banks should do with these new digital currencies. And more generally, there's the idea of thinking to the organization of the global financial market. Well, I think that this is the end of my answer. If you look at the next slide, it's just to point to the different task forces of the G20. If you are interested in looking at what the G20 will do this year, you can follow it. There is a website of the G20 Italy to 2021, and you can follow the different the different task forces and see what type of contributions are given, who is intervening, who is chairing the work, who is contributing. It's transparent. You can follow it. We've just started to nourish its website, but you will see that it is going to be richer and richer become richer and richer during the year.
Great. Thank you so much for your speech and for your presentation. Obviously, we have to consider that the main countries, the main also group of countries, they have very often a single policy, a specific policy, and to find very often an agreement is not easy, but this is of course the task of diplomacy. Nowadays we have a new administration in the United States, in North America, and this new administration is maybe looking in a different direction compared to the previous one. One of the last sentences of the new president was "America is back," which means America now is back also mainly in Europe and ready to cooperate and also to strengthen multilateralism. We also have a Southern American continent, which is very often in trouble with internal stability problems. We have the African continent, which is also in huge trouble. Only a few days ago, if we remember, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said that 10 countries got 75% of all the vaccines, and we have still 130 countries that didn't receive one single vaccine. And this is another huge problem of distribution and of power. We have Russia, and we will talk about Russia, which is, of course, another giant, not only because of its extension, but because of its power, its political, military power, and also its very important economic role that we have in the global economy. Russia, which is also having in the last years difficult relations with Europe and with the Western countries. We have China, which is the second economy of the world, which was the first country to be affected by the pandemic. And now China is relaunching the economy and is succeeding to start again to work a lot. China, which has also signed two very important agreements in the last 3 months, one to create a new market in Southeast Asia, with Indonesia, with ASEAN countries, with Japan, with Australia and New Zealand, and China, which has also signed very recently a new agreement for the investment with the European Union. Then we have Japan, which is the third economy of the world. And we have Southeast Asia with Australia and Indonesia. And we have, of course, our Europe. So now my next question for Professor Antonio Villafranca is concerning Europe and EU, the European Union, which has been, of course, crossing different and difficult years in the last decades because of the huge economic and financial crisis since 2008, 2009. And now Europe, which has to face this new additional challenge, which is the COVID-19. In your opinion, Professor Villafranca, what are the main, of course, challenges that the EU has in front of itself in the next years? Can you try to indicate, in your opinion, what are the main challenges that EU has in front of itself, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me with you this afternoon. Let me start by saying that Europe was already sick before COVID-19. I mean, we are coming out of years, basically, of a Europe in a standstill, with no ability to foresee and to pave the way to a revived Europe. We have gone through the 3 presidents, 4 presidents, whatever the number of presidents, documents, trying, to set, guidelines to reform the European Union, to proceed with further integration, but basically we're not able to do anything. Just, very, very few steps were taken before COVID-19. COVID-19 was, a fortunate event. Let me put it paradoxically like this: for the European Union, there is a motto in Europe, but also around the world, which is "You should not waste a good crisis." And the European Union is doing its best not to waste this bad crisis, let's put it this way, of course, because in terms of recipes which were provided by the European Union after the COVID-19, well, it is simply impressive, what we have been able to do. And it is absolutely different and very far from what we were expecting just, 1 year and a half ago. If you think, for instance, of the ability of the European Union to issue a public debt, I mean, it was absolutely a taboo for Germany. You know it very well. Every time, we used to talk about it, the possibility to have a common debt in the European Union with the German counterparts, they were totally against it. They said you cannot even mention that just because we don't trust Southern European countries, and specifically Italy, for the high debt that we were having. Now it's even higher. We are very close to 100, to the skyrocketing 160% of our GDP. Still, there are many other countries which are now beyond 100%. Take for instance France. So in a way, I mean, the black swan of the COVID-19 helped Europe to revive itself, to provide, a new stimulus for a new integration in the European Union. And what we have been doing so far is really impressive. Here you have the three main tools. Then Franco, of course, will talk about more extensively the European Central Bank, but let me focus on three major steps which were taken by the European Union. First is SURE, 100 billion euros to support European European labor market. What does it mean in concrete terms? It means that there is a joint debt issued by the European Union, and loans are given to member states to support the redundancy funds. Cassa Integrazione, for instance, in Italy, and all the other labor redundancy funds. So this is one of the first steps which were taken by the European Union. Then one which is actually very much politicized, which is the European Stability Mechanism, and I will talk about it in a minute or so. And of course, the Recovery Fund, the Next Generation EU, with 750 billion euros, which will be spread across Europe to support mostly reforms and investment. Now, if we move to the other, all right, we start with SURE, which is, as I said, this instrument which provides loans to European member states. What is the rationale behind that? Basically, the European Union is able to issue bonds to raise debt at a lower interest rate compared to Italy, especially to Southern European countries. So there is a saving in terms of interest rates. And of course, it is much better for Italy, Spain, and especially other Southern European countries to have new debt vis-a-vis the European Union instead of having new debt vis-a-vis financial markets, which are much more unstable than the European Union itself. So I'll be very quick on this. So far, 53.5 billion euros have been already disbursed to 15 member states, including Italy, which has already gotten 21 billion euros. So it's a good amount of money to support redundancy funds. So for a specific objective and for a social objective, which is of course crucial in the midst of an economic crisis. Next one is on the ESM. This is a very strange story, because finally, just a few months ago, Italy, paradoxically, accepted to support the reform of the European Stability Mechanism, the ESM. Just to remind everybody what it is and when it was born. It was born in 2012, when, of course, we were in the middle of the European financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis, as an attempt to build a European tool to save countries from failing. In a very difficult way, Franco knows it very well, because, if you read the European treaties, it is clearly stated that other states cannot save, Italy or, European states which are in the brink of default. So in a way, the European Stability Mechanism is at odds with the European treaties, in which it is clearly stated that it is impossible. So at the beginning, in order to save, for instance, Greece, which was really on the brink of default, we provided bilateral loans, because in Europe we didn't know how to manage the situation. So they were simply bilateral loans. Then we created a private instrument, which was the European Financial Stability, European Financial Facility, which provided loans also to Greece and other states. And finally, we created the European Stability Mechanism, which is an international organization which is able to provide loans to states which are in trouble. But the European Stability Mechanism was not included in the European framework, institutional framework. So the reform, the first thing that the reform did is to include the European Stability Mechanism in the European institutional framework. Why is it important? Because, you know, if there will be a new financial crisis in the future, it is much better to have an instrument which is fully a European interest in terms of confidence by international market. It is much better to have a full-fledged European instruments. And this reform includes two major milestones. One is the ability of the European Stability Mechanism to provide a backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. In a very easy way, what does it mean? That if there is a bank crisis, a banking crisis, so banks are on the brink of collapse for a financial crisis, wherever it comes from around the world, well, there is a fund which is, you know, supported by national banks year by year, which provide a guarantee, for instance, which provides, money to save banks. But when all this money is used, okay, we need also a European guarantee. Well, the European Stability Mechanism, through money which is given by member states, provides a guarantee for the Single Resolution Fund. So it is, you know, a very welcome reform of the European Stability Mechanism. The other reform concerns the ability of the European Stability Mechanism to provide loans, to provide money to states which are close to default. In this case, I mean, this is a figure taken from the very website of the European Stability Mechanism. They say that they made precautionary credit lines, you know, the lines from which states can get money more effective. Actually, they made it a little less flexible. It is a little more difficult, I mean, to get money, because before you get money from the European Union, from the European Stability Mechanism, you need to sign a memorandum of understanding. And before doing so, in any case, you have to restructure your debt, meaning that first you have to cut the face value of your bonds, because, you know, if you bought, anybody in the world bought, for instance, Italian bonds, they did it because they want profit, they want to have higher interest rates, so they also bear the risk, the higher risk, which comes with a higher interest rate. So before the intervention of the ESM, as it was in the past, you need to restructure your debt. So it means that you have to make private holders of bonds to pay first. And then, in order to activate the European Stability Mechanism, you also have to respect a list of other conditions which are dictated by the ESM itself, which are very strict, which are made a little more stricter, okay, with this reform. That's why, for instance, in Italy, there was such a politicized, you know, reading of the ESM reform, and we know there were also some Italian parties from the Northern League, from the League to the Five-Star Movement, which were against this reform. And we could also talk about the technicalities of the European Stability Mechanism, but let's stick to one point, which is extremely important. I mean, what would happen in a situation in which Italy, for instance, is in the brink of a default if we hadn't the ESM? Because, you know, we are scared of the memorandum of understanding, of this debt restructuring. But if we were in a situation in which, you know, the solvency of Italy is, you know, jeopardized, well, in that case, we would be forced by international financial markets to restructure our debt, but without a public arbiter, without a public helping hand coming from the European Stability Mechanism. So even if we don't really like some technicalities concerning the ESM, it is much better to have it instead of not having it. having it, because in that case, instead, if we hadn't it, I mean, instead of dealing with the ESM, we should deal with international financial markets, which are much more unreliable, and sometimes they could also be quite irrational to some extent. So, I mean, we would be in our situation would be much worse. That's why I think that we should welcome this reform. And paradoxically, Italy was one of the first supporter of this ESM, but we were the last one approving the reform, but just for political reasons. But in any case, I mean, my reading of all this is absolutely positive. As you know, and I close on the ESM, the ESM also will provide, is also willing to provide money for direct and indirect health expenses, up to 2% of the national GDP. So it means a little more than 30 billion euros for Italy. They are loans, they are not grants, they are not gifts, okay? So we could also borrow these loans. It is, again, much better to borrow loans from the European Union instead of borrowing the same amount from international financial markets with a lower interest rate. We are not using it. There is a political decision so far of not using it. Nobody in Europe has so far using this money with no other, strings attached, with no other conditionality. There is no memorandum of understanding to be signed. We just need to use this money for our health system. It's our decision not to use it for political reasons. But in any case, the only reason why we should use it is to save money. There is a calculation made in terms of savings, interest rates. We would save by borrowing money through the ESM instead of borrowing money by international financial market. It is in the order of 500 million euros. Okay, it's not a huge amount, still it is a saving. So now if we go on very quickly, because I want to go now to
running, unfortunately.
Franco. Yes, and I'll close here. The third leg, and I will listen then to Franco, but I can say something more about this, is the most important one, which is the recovery fund. This is a stepping stone for the European Union. This is a game changer. This is the very first time in which there is a common issue of a European debt. I mean, this money coming to each European member state, it is more than 200 billion euros just for Italy. I mean, comes from a common issuance of public debt by the European Union, the very first time in the European integration. It is a game changer. And let me just conclude by saying that if we don't spend in Italy very well, effectively, this money, this, in my view, will be also the end of the European solidarity, because the spotlight of the European capitals now is on Italy. If we don't spend well, this is the last time that we will get money from the European Union. And this is the last time that they will give us money through a common issuance of public debt at the European level. So I will stop here, please.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thank you so much for explaining us what are now the tools that the European Union has at its disposal and the main challenges that the European Union will have to face in the next months. But Franco, I would like to be back to you, because in the report that we were mentioning, the report prepared by ISPI on the 2021, you wrote a part on this, and I would like you in few minutes, if you may also sum up what are the main problems that we may have in front of us. So to react to the COVID-19 together, how easy was to find this agreement, and how quick and effective will be this tool to relaunch the European economy and to defeat this incredible invisible enemy. Please take the floor, Franco.
Thank you. I will just add a few things, because Antonio has already given a lot of information. If you can go to the slide, my slide on New Generation EU. Yeah. No, go ahead again.
Yes.
Another one again. Yes. Just to stress the importance of this major reaction of Europe, it took a lot of time to reach an agreement. There were a lot of tensions, but at the end it was possible to get it. There are at least 6 aspects, I think, that make this a game changer, as Antonio was saying. So something that will change the structure of the European integration, even, independently of the pandemic. First of all, the size. It's a very large amount of money, 750 billion in 6 years. And this is 4.5% of EU annual GDP. Now, the budget of the European Union, the central budget of the European Union is around 1% of GDP. And it's also impressive how much has been given to countries that have suffered more from the shock, like Italy. Italy got something that is larger than 10% of its GDP. Italy's GDP is around 11% of the European Union's total GDP, but we got 27% of the total funds. So there was an enormous distribution towards countries like Italy and Spain, for instance, that are suffering particularly from that, also Greece. Another aspect is solidarity. There is an element of solidarity in the fact that part of this money is not going to be reimbursed. It's not; these are not loans but grants. And second, the fact that the money hasn't been given proportionally to the size of member countries, but also looking at the special problems, the size of the problems that these countries had with the pandemic, and the weakness of these countries before the pandemic. Like, for instance, the unemployment rate of the different countries, or the level of of the GDP per capita was taken into account, and this is the reason why Italy had such a large amount. By the way, there's a lot of stories about the fact that, European diplomacy has been able to obtain all this money, that the Italian and Spanish governments were very effective in but this is not true. I mean, the initiative started from Brussels. The decision to work out a measure which had elements of solidarity of this type was decided at the center, and then obviously the diplomatic work was important. It is also interesting that this money is not given for anything. It's given with a strategic approach. In order to get the money, you have to make up a plan, and this plan has to answer to certain basic criteria dictated by the European Union, with a lot of emphasis on greening economies, on digital issues, on education, etc. And you have to go to also use the money to facilitate reforms of various sorts that will increase the effectiveness of this financing. There's also a lot of interest in the fact that this money is linked to the standard budget of the Union. The Union has its own budget. It's had this since the beginning, and it's a budget that normally is devoted to certain expenditures. Now, in a way, this new generation EU has been decided together with the budget, which has basically been doubled in size. It's also interesting that in order to finance this amount of expenditures, new revenue sources will be decided. This is going to happen this year. So the plan is to discuss about it and deliberate about the carbon tax, about the digital levy on the major digital industries, a financial transaction tax, and which I think is the most important one, to reform corporate taxation in order to make it more harmonious, less eliminate a bit the competition between countries to lower corporate taxes and to harmonize the tax bases. Moreover, as Antonio has already said, it's the first time that the European Union is going into deficit, and and we are going to cover this deficit by issuing Eurobonds. That is bonds that behind these bonds you have the joint financial power of all member countries. So this is very important, and obviously these bonds will be sold at a very low interest rate in the global world, because the risk is very low, given that behind these bonds there is the entire union. I think this is the most important thing I wanted to say. I can add perhaps one observation. New Generation EU is a fiscal measure. It's a public expenditure for European common goods. Okay, if we are discussing the reaction of Europe to the pandemic, we should also remember that the central bank and monetary policy has been extremely important. An enormous amount of liquidity has been created by the central bank in order to facilitate the life of firms, banks, households during this pandemic. There's only one problem here, that now we have the debts. And this enormous amount of liquidity is threatening financial stability for the future. So, and we don't know how to sort of withdraw this liquidity. It's premature, because the pandemic is still with us. We still need a lot of liquidity. We still need a lot of help. But sooner or later, we will have to confront the problem of exiting, as we say, exiting these measures of extreme creation of liquidity. And this is going to be difficult, because interest rates will increase, perhaps inflation expectations will increase, and managing the macroeconomy of Europe at that moment is going to be tremendously difficult. So let's hope that both the central bank and the European Commission will be able to stay ready, and when the machine has to change direction, they will do it in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Franco, for your answer. I now would like to focus the attention of the audience. As you know, we have friends from every corner of the world, people from China, from Russia, from Africa, from America, and from Europe, of course. And resources is not everything. So the financial resources are important, but then we need a wise political authority, a wise political governance that should drive the resources in the proper direction. And we have a lot also of political problems in this world. When we talk about the geopolitical analysis for the international business in our business school, is exactly that. How much the political problems can affect the business, can affect the trade as a source of prosperity in the world. Today, we have several political problems. We have problems with some countries. If I mention, of course, the names of some countries such as Venezuela, North Korea, China, Russia, Belarus, Iran, we have some countries that very often represent problems. Of course, we have to be extremely respectful. Very often there are not the appropriate approach to those countries. We do not have the same point of view, the same evaluation of international law, human rights, respect of the sovereignty of the states, and so on. So the dialogue is extremely important. So my last question before the debate, and I will open the debate to the audience in a very few minutes, to Professor Antonio Villafranca, is the following one. In your opinion, which will be the main threats in the next months that you see in front of you? We have issue on disarmament. We are waiting for a new treaty between the United States of America and the Russian Federation on the nuclear weapons. So we are talking also since many months about new agreements concerning disarmament, including also China. We have the issue of NATO and the role of NATO. We have, of course, a lot of elements that intervene in the international dimension. Antonio, what would you say if you had in few minutes, I know you are the magician that can do it in few minutes, to answer to this question, please?
I'm not a magician, but I do my best. I mean, of course, you mentioned a lot of potential, issues which, can further divide the world. But let me just stress one structural problem at the world level, which is, confrontation. I mean, we entered the COVID crisis with a very high degree of confrontation around the world, specifically for the very, peculiar political order in which we live today, which is a multipolar order. And for those of you who studied international relations, they know that a multipolar system is much more unstable than a bipolar system, for instance, the ones we had the Cold War. Today we live in a very peculiar multipolar system, because it's true that there are different poles, but there are two big actors by far, which are the United States and China. And we entered this crisis with a higher and growing confrontation between China and the US. And we will be exiting this crisis, hopefully as soon as possible, with still high confrontation between the US and China. It's not going to be over. I totally disagree with the ones who think that, for instance, with Biden, okay, they will soften, Biden will be able to soften this confrontation, because this confrontation goes well beyond Trump. Of course, the rhetoric will be different. The words which be used by both the United States and China will be different. Still, the remaining sources, the intrinsic, the deep sources of confrontation are still there. They are not going to change. This animosity, this confrontational stance towards China is cross-cutting between Republicans and Democrats, for instance, in the United States. It's not going to change also with Biden. Again, the rhetoric will be different, but still, what is the source, the real source of this confrontation is not even trade wars or trade itself, but it is technological supremacy. And this is, what we are going to see, this race towards a technological supremacy over the next years. And it's going to be with us also beyond COVID, and despite the fact that we have Biden as the new US president. It's going to be with us. And Europe, as we clearly stated in our annual report at ISPI, is between Europe, between the United States and China. And we need to find our way out. I mean, we signed last December a huge agreement, an impressive agreement with China, especially on investment. But over the next weeks, for instance, we already saw that China, for instance, passed some laws and new regulation, which is undermining some specific aspects of these agreements. And the United States said, okay, we warned you. We told you you could not trust them. I mean, Europe has to find its way between these two big competing powers. And this is, for me, the biggest unknown of the future, the biggest challenge, because of course you mentioned all the other challenges, but if we lived in a world with lower confrontation, it would be easier also to solve the other problems, including of course climate change, which is the only field in which I foresee, but it's not very difficult to foresee it, some steps which will be taken over the next year or two, or couple of years. But in all the other fields, I unfortunately don't see any major step which will be taken because of this,
Thank
strong confrontation between the United States on the one hand and China on the other.
Thank you very much for your quick answer and extremely effective, because you reduce the debate to this main confrontation, the two main economies of the world. Of course, we have also other countries such as I was mentioning, Russian Federation. We have the importance, of course, of Europe. We have also the other continents. Africa is also a big question mark. You know that in Italy now we have a new government since a few days, and the new prime minister. We are always very proud to remind that he was one of our ad honorem graduates in the MIB Trieste School of Management 15 years ago. Mario Draghi is now driving Italy next toward the future, and let's hope that he will drive it, and we are sure he will drive it in the proper way. But only a few hours ago we had the news that one of the Italian ambassadors was killed in Africa, in Congo, and that was creating a big emotion, of course, in Italy, and the diplomatic corps is very sensitive to that. So diplomacy has a crucial role in this, and obviously we have many other challenges. And sometimes in Europe, we are aware of the fact that the European Union is also leading the world in some aspects. If we take into consideration the new program of the EU Commission that Ursula von der Leyen is leading, and the next generation EU is not only the resources, the next generation EU is the target for the future, is the reduction of the CO2 emission, the huge energy transition that needs also a good partnership with most of the energy powers, including Russia, of course. It is also the digital revolution that we would like to adopt. In many framework, Europe is a leading power in this moment in the world, but we need the new partnership, and the G20 will be one of them. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like immediately to leave the floor to the participants. If anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. As you know, you have the tool to raise hands, or just say it in the chat, and we will give you the floor, and you will open your microphone and you will ask your questions. Please. Good. Awaiting that some of you would have the courage to ask questions to our expert. I will dare to ask one more question to Professor Franco Bruni. Franco, in your G20, I think there will be also the opportunity to welcome back the presence of some powers that in the last months were creating some, I would say, some problems in the Western side. I'm referring to China, Russia. In the G7, we do not have neither China nor Russia. Russia was part of the G8, and then since some years, Russia is not part anymore, but both are part of the G20. So in the G20, the world is looking for a new cooperation among the main powers. Do you think it will be easy in the next months, in your opinion?
Well, it's more than I can answer. I mean, it's a guess. I think Antonio was very much right in stressing that the tensions are very high and very difficult to eliminate. Basically, I think that China is the major problem. If we were able to, to agree on something substantial with China, I think that this would be a very important step. There are also security issues there in the Far East that are very, very serious. But then let me give you just a very partial answer to your question, in the sense that, the G20 has a very high diplomatic feature. I mean, it's a lot of, there are also a lot of bilateral talks that take place when people meet. Now, this year we will have problems to have people physical meetings, but they will meet. I mean, ministers, they will find a way of meeting also personally, and this will give rise to a lot of bilateral also discussions. And there are possibilities to make steps in the direction of a more united world in a way, and a less confrontation. But it's very difficult. The approach of the G20, I think, could be little concrete steps. So forget about the big strategies. Okay, they will discuss this somewhere, and it's crucial that they discuss it. But suppose we can get together and solve in a smooth fashion some apparently technical economic problems, like the problem of the debt of poor countries. I mean, it's a tremendous problem, and it involves a lot China, a lot the United States, a lot international organizations like the IMF, a lot Europe. It's a problem that where everybody has its stake. Suppose we can get a solution and that satisfies everybody, including obviously the poor countries. I mean, this is an important step that will help to smooth a little bit the confrontation. I don't believe that the confrontation can be, confronted directly. We have to go through little steps. I mentioned the economic step of the debts of poor countries, but there are also less economic steps, like problems of the digital governance of digital problems, where the confrontation between China and United States is very serious, because if they break the digital systems in two, I mean, and the world, and if you are, say, Europe or Italy, you have to choose either you stay here or you stay there. And technically, the digital world will be sort of segmented and divided. It's going to be a disaster for everybody. It's going to be also very dangerous, because digital crime will have much more. It's going to be easier for digital crime to go ahead. So there are, little things that can be, and the G20 approach, I think, is this one. It's not to go for very large and vague plans of making peace or confrontation. Is to try to tackle specific issues and try to get a solution there.
Thank you so much for your answer, Franco. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Emerson, who raised his hand first. Please introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Emerson. I'm from São Paulo, Brazil. My question is, it's not exactly a question, it's a comment that please you could comment on, and maybe I would like to see your point of view on this. What I see is that when in cases of G20 or any other forum that try nowadays to work on these issues, I see that Europe and the United States, they are both internally divided as well, because of many opinions and many other points of view of people. And these differences have been raising, unfortunately, recently. And it's difficult. I see one of the difficulties to sit and discuss with other countries is when we look to our countries, when we see a division in our countries, because you are there representing which point of view.
Good.
And then sometimes we focus on business, we focus on sorry?
No, yes, I say thank you for your question. So the question is, how can we be effective in leading
Yes.
the international community if we have division inside of our countries, inside of
Yes.
Europe? And it's okay. Antonio, would you like to answer to this question?
Answer is not easy. Otherwise, I will win the Nobel Prize, for something like this. It is really difficult. I mean, let's put it this way and beyond rhetoric. I mean, when you are facing a big crisis and you are an authoritarian state, you can act immediately, you can act swiftly, and you can also provide, to some extent, even better answers, also in terms of timing, okay? When you are a democracy, of course, it is much more complicated, especially in times of crisis, which is, today's situation, and especially in a situation in which we have to recognize that globalization is producing inequalities. And when you produce inequalities inside each country, now it is something which also, the majority of economists, accept that globalization produces inequalities, okay? If you accept this, you have to recognize that a more unequal society is also a more conflictual society. So this is one of the biggest challenges for the states, but most of all for democratic states, how to address the issue of inequalities. This is for me one of the biggest issues, because an unequal and unfair society, unfortunately, tends to be, less democratic, tends to vote for populist movements, for far right or far left movements, and so on. And this, of course, can also put at risk democracy, especially new democracy. I don't see this problem, frankly speaking, for European countries, but I see this problem for other democracies outside the European Union, especially new democracies. The democracy itself, and we have to accept it, unfortunately, we don't like it, but we have to say the truth, is not the model it used to be, for instance, in the 90s. We don't even think of exporting democracies the way we thought in the past. Unfortunately, I will add, but this is the case today, and we have to be totally frank, in saying that this is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.
Very much, Antonio. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Diego Zerial, who raised his hands. Please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Diego, and I'm from Trieste, where the school is based, after all. I found the contribution by Professor Villafranca very interesting, and I just have not really questions, but perhaps more feedback about what he said. I was really, I paid attention to the concept that, according to what he said, a multilateral, multipolar system is inherently more unstable than a bipolar system like we had, like during the Cold War with the NATO against versus the Warsaw Pact. But honestly, I'm old enough to kind of remember the tale of the Cold War. It didn't seem to me a very stable period, or not any more stable than it is today, neither from the point of view of conflictuality around the world, nor from the point of view, financial point of view. And, by many parameters, it didn't seem to me at all a period kind of more manageable. In any case, I would say that we have now different types of risks. For example, probably the nuclear Armageddon maybe is, I hope, slightly less likely right now, even though it's always a possibility compared to what it was like in the at the end of the 1980s. But we do have a much bigger problem in terms of, for example, climate changes and things like that. So I wouldn't say that the stability has changed. The problems have changed. There are different problems, but a second point of feedback, I would say that perhaps a little bit of instability is actually a little bit of opportunity in some ways if we look at the bright side of it. And in fact, what I thought was really interesting was the talk about the way the European Union is reacting to a big crisis like COVID. And I think that actually the first time I saw the European Union speaking with one voice, and I was really impressed by that, was with the Brexit crisis, because I kept an eye, a very close eye to the negotiations led by Michel Barnier's team. And I really had the sense for the first time that, you know, we are protected by Europe in a very substantial way. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Your comment, of course, would lead us to another conference about the analysis between the bipolar system and the multipolar system. On one side, probably I try to answer to this question, Franco and Antonio, if you agree. On one side, during the bipolar system, we had probably a more dangerous world in front of us because of the two blocks were highly competing, and during the Cold War, we also had a high level of rearmament between the two blocks. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the new period, the new multipolar period that you are referring to, is more characterized by détente, which means a more relaxed period, even though we had several regional crises and regional wars in this world. Now, as I told you before, probably the main target would be to find an appropriate governance to regulate this multipolar world. And the G20 is one of the possible answers to that. It's not the only one. Of course, we still have the United Nations organization, but during also the COVID-19 pandemic, even the United Nations organization, and namely one of the specialist institution of it, the Organization of Health, of course, was under question, because it was also accused not to react in a proper way to the big threat. And on the other side, we have the World Trade Organization. We are still waiting for a new agreement in the framework of international trade. If we consider, Mr. Zerial, that our Doha development agenda is waiting until 2001 for the signature of an effective document that should regulate the international trade. So we are still navigating in a troubled sea sometimes, and obviously we are looking for this governance. Let's hope that Italy will drive the G20 this year in the proper direction. And I would go to one question that was proposed in the chat by Mr. Piton or Mrs. Piton, when she is saying, I will not read it because it's very long, but she's focusing her attention on Italy, and she would like to know the advice or the opinion of our two experts, Professor Bruni and Professor Villafranca, on the Italian capability to change and to adapt itself in a quick and rational way to the new challenging world. Of course, she raised the question: is it a matter of education? She's referring also to the personality of Mario Draghi. Of course, Mario Draghi is the most prestigious nowadays personality that Italy has, and also in the international environment, the credibility of Mario Draghi is very high. But Mario Draghi is not the only intellectual and well-prepared personality that we have. The level, of course, of education in Italy is, of course, quite high, even though sometimes we do not have the best personalities that play a role in a specific framework. So, Franco, what would you think about Italy? Let's conclude our conference on our country. I thank Miss or Mrs. Piton for the question, because in your opinion, which is the chance that Italy has to start for a renewal of the political activity and for a wise and enlightened leadership?
Well, obviously, Italy, in terms of the challenging world of the G20, Italy must act in full solidarity with Europe. So it doesn't make very much sense to think to Italy as a policy maker in the international world if we don't place it into the European concerns. On the other side, the solidity of Europe depends a lot on Italy. Italy, for some reason, I mean, we're 27 in the Union, and but Italy has a really very crucial position. So the question is interesting because Italy has a big responsibility. If we behave in the correct way, we will help Europe to stay united and to reinforce its integration, and therefore also to play a more important role in the global level. And we have a problem there because our credibility is not very high. Our country is not growing, has not been growing for the last 25 years practically. It's a disaster. Our productivity is very low, and we don't have a lot of credibility in terms of the way we manage economic things. The reputation of issues of corruption in Italy is very bad. And the trust in Italy is not very high. So we have to, in a way, resuscitate the country by staying together, being very, very united inside the country, trying to find unity on certain themes, and then convince our partners and in Europe that we can stand the challenge. Let me point to one example of this, which is very important. And let me go back to the New Generation EU, this enormous amount of financing that we are receiving. Well, in dealing in the diplomatic work that was needed to get to the final decision, there was a group of countries in Europe, so-called the frugal countries. They're made of the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, and Finland. And then, but their opinion is also elsewhere in Europe, including Germany, that were very hostile to the idea of giving all this money to Italy, for instance. And they were saying, well, we don't want to spend so much money. Okay, the pandemic is very serious, but let's not exaggerate with debt, with liquidity, etc. And this is the reason why they were called frugals. But then, with some diplomacy, their opposition was overcome. If you read the chapters of our report, you will find something on this. But what is interesting is that at a certain point, they came out, these countries, they came out by saying, well, look, we are not frugals, really. Our problem is not that we don't want a lot of money to be spent in order to, the problem is that we don't trust the way this money is spent. So we want to be sure that this money is not going to finance a corrupted system, an inefficient system. This money is not going to go in the wrong direction. And therefore, this is the challenge. We have to prove that this is possible. Draghi has been mentioned. I mean, I don't know how important is the prime minister as a person, but certainly Draghi is a plus in this. The fact of having been able to call him back in Italy and giving them a very large majority in the parliament is in a way an expression of effort that could be appreciated at the European level. And therefore, there could be some trust that we are able to make those reforms that will reassure everybody on our ability to use the money and resources and the trust of the rest of Europe in the right way. It's incredible that one country can, but suppose that Italy doesn't behave in the correct way. Suppose that our debts become really unsustainable. Suppose that we are going really to, be unable to service our debt. This is going to be a tremendous shock for Europe because Italy is enormously important. It's a very large country in the group. And financially, we are even more important because our debt is everywhere. The banks of Europe are full of government securities of Italy. So if Italy goes in the wrong direction, this is a problem for everybody. And therefore, our responsibility in keeping Europe in good shape, able to act also in a united fashion at the global level, is very, very high. So this is why the effort in this moment is extremely, extremely important. And I think that everybody's conscious about that. And we see that day after day, positions are converging a bit on the fact that we have to make a big effort in this direction.
Thank you, Franco. Antonio, would you like also to say something on this subject?
Well, actually, I totally agree with Franco. I mean, Draghi its credibility is with there's no way to discuss it, but we have to also acknowledge that in order to for him to deliver, the majority supporting it, which is so large at the moment, should be there also in 8 months, 9 months, and hopefully much more than that. And the weaknesses of Italy are still with us. I mean, in order to spend this money, of course, it is much better to have Draghi as prime minister, and we can borrow from his credibility around the world. Still, we still all have the Italian weaknesses, the regional weaknesses, because we have to spend money at the local level. We know that there could be also mafia and 'ndrangheta interested in all this money flowing. And there is another aspect because we are all talking about money investment, 200 billion euros coming to Italy, but don't forget, please, they come with strings attached. It means that we must reform, and we urgently need reforms. And Draghi, I'm sure, is able to reform Italy. But my question mark, and I'm sorry to conclude in a low note, is the majority supporting this government really willing to support these reforms which are required to get money, tranche by tranche from the European Union? This is my final question mark.
Thank you. And we will have the answer to that, Antonio, in the next months, in any case, because we will have to see the behavior of the Italian political class. We are going to conclude, but Mr. Technospark raised his hands. If you have a very quick question, please ask it, and then we will go to the conclusion, sir.
You're muted.
You should open your microphone, please, sir. You should open your microphone, sir. Yes. We cannot
Okay.
hear you.
Are you hearing me? Hello.
Please go ahead, sir.
Hello. Based on the I'm from Africa.
Sorry to interrupt you. Please stop. Unfortunately, the quality of your voice is not good. We cannot understand you. Can you write your question on your chat, on the chat, please? So we will welcome your question and then we go to the conclusion. Okay. So while you write your question in the chat, I also would like to welcome among us many students and former students of MIB Trieste School of Management, but also many colleagues, many students of other schools, but also many colleagues as Professor Danica Purg, who is smiling in front of us, and he is the director of the most prestigious business school in Slovenia and the president of CIMAN, which is an extremely important association of business school. And she is working together with our dean, Professor Nanut, since many years. And hopefully this year in Trieste, we will welcome the annual conference of CIMAN. We had to, of course, delay that last year because it was not possible. Let's hope that it will be possible this year, of course. So, sir, did you write your question, Mr. Technospar? I'm talking to you. You raise your hand. Good. Are you able to write your question, sir? Otherwise, we need to go to the conclusion. Okay, we appreciate my effort for this meeting. Good, good. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, what have been we have been doing in the last 90 minutes? We have been meeting, linking different continents in a critical moment for the world. We were been focusing our attention on the geopolitical aspect of international business, on the political and economic scenario of our world in 2021. We have a lot of unknown elements in front of us, but we have a lot of hope, because this year is the year of hope. It should be the year of recovery. We have already some indicators. We now have a look on what is going on in London, for instance. The United Kingdom is showing a good example. They are succeeding to offer the vaccine to a big number of citizens. And yesterday, the Prime Minister, or today, the Prime Minister said that in March, they will start to the first step of reopening, and they think that in June, they will completely eliminate any sort of restriction. This is an indicator of hope. Other countries in Europe are behind. Italy is behind in this moment, but other areas of the world are largely behind. Africa is behind, part of Asia is behind, part of Central and Eastern Europe is behind, and in Southern America too, there are a lot of problems. We have several friends from Brazil today that are attending this conference, and for instance, we hope to be able, and we will be able to welcome our, for instance, students from Southern America in Italy in the next weeks. We would like to do that, but the restrictions are largely, of course, compromising this. But we will succeed on that. We need hope, we need goodwill, we need cooperation. We have a world in front of us which has a lot of critical points, a lot of weaknesses, but also many strengths. We have many opportunities. The European Union is describing some of the opportunities, and we have to think about the next generation that we have in front of us, because our children, our nephew will be the future, and we have to prepare a proper world. The business school are, of course, trying to indicate the way to make a proper business within the framework of ethics. We transfer values to our students. We do not have only profit in our mind. We have profit, but included in a proper framework. And the proper framework, of course, requires the knowledge of this complicated world that we have in front of us. So this is the sense of analyzing these problems together, and MIB Trieste School of Management, together with ISPI Milan, they cooperate since many years. Professor Bruni is our visiting professor since many years. Professor Antonio Villafranca has been also dealing with myself in the last years. We have been writing reports together, and we try to offer our effort to help our students, our researchers, to better understand this complicated world. but this is a fascinating task. And that is why we would like to thank a lot ISPI for its cooperation, for allowing us to get access to all the documents that they publish daily on their internet site. The ISPI report, which will be, I repeat, available in English in few days, but also for preparing many very interesting analyses that we, for instance, myself as a professor, I very often use it during my lectures all over the world. Dear friends, dear students, dear former students of MIB, dear professors, dear authorities, we would like to thank you a lot for your attendance. This conference has been recorded, and our school will give you, of course, the recorded version, so you can also deliver to somebody else. And we will for sure inform you in the next future when we will have new opportunities to deliver such international conference. So thank you for everyone, for your presence, for your participation. Thank you, Professor Franco Bruni. Thank you, Professor Antonio Villafranca. Thank you for everyone. Thank you also to Professor Jadranka Polovic from Zagreb University. We are very happy to have all of you with us, and we will grow together with cooperation and mutual, of course, help. Thanks a lot. Arrivederci.
Oh,
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.
grazie.
Ciao.
Grazie, presto.
Ciao, grazie Stefano. Ciao Franco.
Ciao.